Bruce, welcome to Succession Stories. I'm excited that you're with me today.
Thank you for having me. It is great to be here today.
We are going to have a really interesting conversation. It's not often that I talk with people who have done both sides of the table in terms of transactions, buy side and sell side, and you've been part of a family business for multiple generations. And also you work with business owners to help them in their next phase of their entrepreneurial journey. So let's start with you. Tell me about the succession story for your family business.
Thank you for asking. So we owned Werner Ladder. We actually had three businesses, the largest climbing equipment company in the world. We were the largest independent aluminum extruder in the country. And so if you drove a car or were in a building in New York, you probably used our products and didn't know it. We also had a property and casualty insurance company. And over 80 years, we were very fortunate to grow a big business, but our markets changed. And I was raised saying you can never sell the family business. And one day, lo and behold, we woke up and two customers were 40% of revenue. And the business was about taking care of the family. And I will often say families choose business first or family first. Inherently, we chose family first. The business was an asset to protect the family. We wound up making the right decision at the right time for the right reason. And for the most part, 23 years later, we all pretty much get along. And so we did not make a decision quickly. We spent a couple of years. We had a lot of outside consultants. Eventually found someone who worked well with us. We had good advisors, and we were just, because we're all engineers, very analytical about it. And eventually, while very difficult at the time, looking back, I've consistently said, we did the right thing to protect the family. Each family situation is unique. I would encourage people to focus on the process that they're going through and get good advisors. Because while it's the first time for you, it's not the first time. And we should learn from those who have walked before us. And then, history rhymes but doesn't repeat, as Mark Twain said. Take those snippets and learn how do you optimize it for your own circumstance.
What was the circumstance for your family? How many family members were in the company at the time?
Sure. So we had 10 insiders, 4 dads and 6 sons in the boardrooms. The dads were second generation, grew up in the business. My dad had one job for 45 years. The 6 sons, we had 3 rules. You had to work somewhere else first. You started at the bottom and worked your way up, and you worked for your uncle, not your dad, because we were so big. So 2 of the cousins were M&A guys at Goldman Sachs. One was CFO of a public company. I had started a company at age 25, and one cousin was a corporate M&A attorney, and one built one of the largest steel plants in the country. So no shrinking violets. I think only one of us didn't have at least one graduate degree. So we were all, we were fortunate and, all were going to do something. So we had 10 insiders, but we had 110 shareholders spread across 5 family trees, spreading from Paris to LA. So we had a number of, I'll say, aunts, widowed aunts who depended upon the dividend for their livelihood. Separate from, we had family members who had very successful careers having nothing to do with the family business. And so we tended to take best practices of public companies. So we had a defined dividend policy. We had a very detailed annual report. We had very detailed communication to the shareholders because we were fiduciaries and we acted like fiduciaries. Our top management team, I said we had 10 family members. We also had 10 non-family executives who were critical for our business. So the top management team was actually 20, which is huge. But those non-family people grew up shoulder to shoulder with my dad and his brothers and built the business that my generation was able to come into. So they were valued and respected, and they knew all the family garbage going on. They were great mentors to us. And, as I always say, we were successful because of our people. It's not because we were magical. It's because of them I went to college. And so, everyone knows business is about people, and this is just another example.
How many employees did the company have towards the last phase?
At the peak, we had, I believe, 3,500 employees. We had 7 manufacturing plants in the U.S. We had 11 licensees to distribute around the world. We had 7, 8, 9, 10 unions. We had steel workers and machinists and Teamsters and unaffiliated. We went through horrific labor strife in the 70s and 80s. We were shut down for 6 months. We had, I remember, my uncle trying to go to work and someone pulled a shotgun on the picket line, and you'd wake up in the morning, there'd be broken glass on your driveway. So our headquarters was in Western Pennsylvania, which is steel and coal country. These stories are from for a large part, a bygone era, but very well known in American labor. And so, that's a component of where we came from. It's, far from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, very far. Actually, the Homestead Act was named after just that little town of Homestead, just across the bridge from where I am.
And I'm intimately familiar with the goings on of Morgan and Carnegie and Frick and all those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. The company conversations, I can't even imagine the boardroom. So did you had a fiduciary board and a family board?
So we had a traditional fiduciary board. We had, as my generation came into the business, let me distinguish business governance from family governance. I know you want to talk about governance later, but they're two separate things. They need to develop on their own. Corporate governance tends to develop first. Successful families have family governance, and family governance is typically a couple components. There's a family assembly where it's everybody and it's educational. There's a family council, which is the body which conveys the wishes of ownership to the management team. As between them, the fiduciary board of the business takes directives from the ownership group to run the business. As owners, you only make a handful of decisions. What business am I in? Who runs the business? How do I fund it? What do I want from it? And one or two other things. Other than that, as an owner, you're done. Now, most families choose to employ themselves to run the business, view their W-2 and distributions as their policy. And so it gets confused. But at our size, we needed to be professionally managed. And so as my generation came in and we used to have kids, we would have annual family meetings, and we would take 100 people to this great place in Longboat Key, Florida. And the guys, as we would say, would have business meetings all day, but then the families would meet every night. It was a way for all the relatives got to know each other, because we were spread all over the country. And we wanted the kids to know each other and develop the good relationships. And so that is what would be called a family assembly. We bought a business in Florida a long time ago, and Florida has this unique law that the annual corporate meeting must be held in the state of Florida. Seems reasonable. Since we were all Northerners and it was pretty damn cold in Pittsburgh, we thought February was a great time to have a meeting in Florida. And everyone managed to be available.
Gee, go figure. That sounds like a great idea. Good for Florida to figure that out, and good for you guys to say yes to it. So there's the family assembly, which is different than the family council.
Correct.
So the family council, what's the mission of the council?
So the family council is a small body. It's the bridge between a large, diverse ownership group and the board of directors of the business. They need to have the business smarts to get the family to come to positions that can be communicated to the business. And it's issues like, do we want to go do an acquisition or not? How much risk do we want to take in the business? Are we willing to take on a huge loan to go get into a new product line? Are we happy with what they're doing with the business? Do we want more current income, or do we want to focus on growth? If the family has issues like, we don't want to be in certain businesses, from an ESG perspective, we don't want blood diamonds or cigarettes or munitions. As an ownership group, you can say, we don't want to do that, but you need to communicate it in a way that's effective. Um, and so the family council is that it's kind of like a board of directors for the family. They don't have a vote, right? They have an obligation to be this in between, because if you have a very large family with diverse opinions, you got to go herd the cats. If you've got, if it's one parent and three children, it's the dinner table. So a lot, scale matters. As families grow, they get more complex. There's more diverse opinion. You need more governance. And it's always true that if everyone grew up under the same roof, it's pretty simple. When you grow up with different parents, different parts of the country, different communities, your life experiences are different. So we had a couple sets of cousins that grew up in a wealthy community in Chicago, very metropolitan, and another set of cousins that grew up in a very, very small town where you did not want to stick out. You wanted to blend in. You didn't want attention. The kids in the city, there's different drivers on behavior. And so different personalities, we do things differently. That's, you need a mechanism to keep the wheels on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what size revenues does a company typically become before they say, we need a fiduciary board, or we need a family board of some sort?
Great question. So in my current practice, I help private businesses form and run boards of advisors and boards of directors. There's a lot of observation that when businesses hit 25 or 30 million revenue, people start asking the question, or their friends start telling the owners, you got to be thinking about a board. There's nothing magical about that. It's really about span of control. Up to $10 million, a competent person can run a business. You start pushing $30 million, it's typically one or two people in charge, and there's not much management. What happens is you don't have enough time and enough hands. More importantly, you only have your own experiences, and the challenges you have require broader experiences. And so you need other opinions. And that's what drives, I need to go talk to outsiders. Now, there's Vistage, there's YPO, there's EOS, there's lots of those CEO peer groups, and they're not all the same. And those are all great. In some cases, those serve as that board of directors, especially in Vistage. And if it does, that's great. That's not a reason to join one of those groups. A real board has a different function. People form boards when they're saying, listen, I'm looking out 3 to 5 years. I see issues. I don't know how to solve them. I need help dealing with a 3 to 5 year issue. If sales are down this year, boards can deal with that, but that's not why you form a board. You form a board because you're thinking about the future, and boards are like a bespoke suit. It's custom fit to you. We've all seen annual reports from public companies and all the things they have in there, and that's necessary for a public company. It's not true for a private company. You should do what helps you and forget the rigmarole. And so I say there's 3 or 4 types of advisory boards. There's consulting boards where you pay a per diem and you bring in some people for a day or two a year on certain issues. That's kind of like the starter kit. There's junior advisory boards where you have the typical 4 meetings a year, some interim stuff, but a narrow set of issues really on growth, capital, and developing talent. And you stay away from all the sensitive issues about management compensation, performance review, family politics. That's third rail. And then a full advisory board substantially mimics a fiduciary without the vote. It's a little gray on, like, are we going to review CEO performance? Are we going to talk about, the family compensation? That's situational dependent. I've seen it handled many different ways. It's really about what do the owners want and help. The outsiders you bring in they're going to look for signals on what they can talk about. The better ones will say, just tell me up front what's out of bounds, right? Tell me the rules. Most will watch for cues and they'll kind of probe, but as owners, you get out of it what you put into it. And so I always start with, it's a needs assessment of what are the needs, and then let's design a formal board for those needs, knowing that your needs change over time. We refresh the board, we reposition. It's a living, breathing organism, and it needs to be managed like that.
That's really interesting. So when you're hired to help a company create a board of advisors, do you go into it with the open mindset that it could be one of those three types, a consulting, a junior advisory, or a full advisory?
I go in with a blank piece of paper and a curious mind. There's a question of what are their needs, and then in one sense, what will they tolerate? If it's a first time, bringing in outsiders for the first time is a test of the character of ownership. I don't mean that in a negative way. Some people are more open-minded about it. Some are very close to the vest. What's important is to understand how they are and adapt to that. It's certainly okay to suggest you might want to be a little more open here or there. Or you may be better off by being receptive to information. But you got to start with where are they today, and recognize it's evolutionary. Where are they today? How do we get them on a good path? Where can we get them to in the future? Do they want to go there? I mean, nobody says you have to double your business, you have to grow. It's your asset, you can do whatever you want. You just need to be honest about it.
Do you see any patterns or any differences between a founder looking for an advisory board versus next generation relatives,
Sure.
Maybe 2 or 3 siblings together? And what are those dynamics?
So there's a tremendous amount of literature and research on the generational differences. So let me just use, our family as a very common example. Our founder, the more I think about what he did in his life with a 6th grade education, it's just incredible. He just had that, what we now call that X factor, to do things that were unthinkable against all odds and press forward. And the true entrepreneur in the classic American way. With the second generation, first of all, your problems are different. You're not worried about staying in business. You're worried about managing growth and developing talent. It's a different set of challenges. And also, if you're the founder, you don't call a vote, you do it. When you've got, typically siblings in the second generation, there's always a negotiation. The fact that you had the same mom makes it easier. Typically, in our case, it's typical. There were 4 siblings. They divided the business into 4 parts, and you didn't step on the other guy's turf, and everyone got along. Fortunately, they were talented and they loved each other, and it worked. Put me through college. If the siblings don't get along or can't communicate, that's why a lot of businesses exit family ownership in the second generation. Third generation is different. One of the factors is the family has had some success. They didn't grow up starving like the founder typically did. They've had the benefit of the effort of the prior generation. Their worldviews are different. They say, I don't have to go in the family business, I can do something else. They typically have good education. So in each generation, the point of view is different. And in the same way that the challenges are different. The challenges for a third generation with a bigger business, more business risk. If you have a bank loan, if you have a $100 million bank loan, it's different than borrowing $100,000. More complexity. So the real question is each generation up to the challenge of their generation? And while they should learn from the past, going forward, they need to create a new answer. And that determines if the business prospers and goes on.
So should business owners pick people that they know and that they're friends with, or should they create a recruitment strategy? I'm probably leading the witness.
So that goes back to consulting boards, junior and full advisory boards. The consulting boards tends to be some evolution of your golf buddies. And that's okay if you're uncomfortable with outsiders, you want to take a baby step. It's a place to start. I've often counseled people, just have one meeting. Don't commit. I say, I want to have one meeting and just, try it. You'll like it. You pick 3 people, 2 are great, 1 needs to go. Great. You've learned, you've moved forward. That's okay. Depending upon the size of the business, the needs and the complexity, you want to be more formal with the search process. The things to remember are, what are the issues I'm trying to solve? Who's going to bring experience with that issue? And who wants to have an impact? When you go to bring outsiders in, if they're doing it for the money, you got the wrong person. The really good outsiders do it because they want to have an impact. They want interesting things to work on, and they want to work with interesting people. Those are the people who do the best job for the owners. And the money respects them for their time. And there's well-established compensation surveys for outside directors. So it's not a question of what's the job worth. That's well known. But you're doing it for people who have a passion for having that impact. And the more advanced and sophisticated you are, the more you realize you want to run a search just as if you were hiring a new CEO from the outside or a new CFO from the outside. You're looking for the right talent for the need. But some people need to evolve to that point because they're just not used to having outsiders telling them what to do. And that's okay.
Yeah. One of the things I saw you wrote is noses in, fingers out, sensors on. Can you talk about what that means?
Yeah. So when I started doing board work in my late 20s, first the family business, and since then I've been on 10 or 12 or 15 boards. There's a couple of trade associations for people interested. One is the National Association of Corporate Directors, which is really focused on public companies. If you're in the private company world, it probably not as good a fit, but a really great one for private companies is called the Private Directors Association. It started 7 or 8 years ago. There's 3,000 members. They're in 20 cities. It's a volunteer organization, has great resources, great training. And that's where I learned this expression, which it makes it really simple. What are you supposed to be doing as a director? Noses in means you ought to be poking your nose in, looking for trouble, but not making any. Ask insightful questions. Kind of push and prod a little bit. Fingers out means you're not management. Most people who do this have run businesses, are used to being take charge and get it done in an action plan. Wrong. You don't want to cross the line from director to management. And that is a learned skill. You need to unlearn your natural instincts. If you're qualified to be a director, you probably have to go wrestle with this, unless you're coming out of academia or something like that. Sensors on, the original phrase was noses in, fingers out. The new phrase, as the sensors on, which is you need to have antenna up to anticipate issues. Don't wait until the phone rings and say, hey, we got a problem. It's, I spent a lot of my time thinking about, well, where does this situation take us to? The most important thing you can do as a good director is ask a question that changes the conversation. When people go, oh, and then they just stop. That's one of the best things you can do because, one of my favorite quotes is, it's not about getting the right answers. It's about asking the right questions. As a consultant, my job is to ask the questions that make a difference. If you do that, people know how to solve problems. Let's have them solving the problems that matter.
Right. Are they working on the wrong things? Good questions
right.
Lead to working on the right thing.
Right.
There's so much that we've talked about today that I know we could go deeper. Maybe we have you come back on. So many business owners ask me about this topic of creating an advisory board. And It's a very relevant topic for companies, as you said, in that revenue range of about 20 million, and how to think forward. Another part of thinking forward is succession planning and what I like to call transition planning. And I, of course, work with clients to help them think through that. In your experience, you've met many business owners, you've served on boards, and you've seen it up close with your family. That what happens when you've moved on can be disappointing. Some people say it's bittersweet because they've let something go that was really meaningful to them, a part of their life, a part of their identity. And many people walk away feeling unhappy. And it's hard to believe because they have, quote unquote, all this money now, right? They should be so happy. Can you share some stories that illustrates this point?
Yeah, so I actually do a lot of work with what I generically call life after the deal. So you talk about, I separate management succession from ownership succession. We spoke about ownership succession. Management succession is kind of a different subject. Let's leave that one aside. I have very strong feelings and have had tremendous observations of what happens after people sell and leave their business. And the most striking example from my parents' generation. So we had a rule that you had to retire at 65, and we partially timed the sale of our business. My dad's a twin. So of the 4 siblings, there's 2 twins. Part of our time was driven of let's do it so that they can retire at 65 and have a traditional retirement. That had value to our business. So when they retired, they moved to Florida, do all that kind of stuff. And I'm talking to Dad one day, he says, it's really kind of strange. We're on the East Coast. There's a lot of New Yorkers down here because of where they were. And there's these guys who are captains of industry, titans of Wall Street. They've got ungodly wealth. And they've had tens or hundreds of thousands of people working for them. And they're dead in 6 months. And he's saying, so you go from having people waiting on you hand and foot, the wave of a hand, you control lives. And pardon me, but you're just another old guy at Starbucks. Nobody cares. And he had several friends where literally and so the lessons, and I have some writings coming out, and doing some client work specifically. And just before coming on with you, I was in this conversation with a client of, you need to have a purpose. You need to have an identity. Those are typically locked up in your job. You certainly need to have financial security worked out. You need to think about what's your legacy. What do you want your legacy to be? And the last one is, what about the people who made you successful? And so in my first book, the last chapter is Life After the Deal, I say, you need to start planning 3 to 5 years ahead. You need to make a list of what are you afraid of? What do you like to do? You need to run a series of small experiments and give yourself permission to fail, to figure out, what am I going to do when I don't go to the office anymore? It is a new job. I don't care how successful you are in your current business. This is a different challenge that requires a different set of skills. If you had a successful business, you can figure it out. But you need to purposely apply yourself, and every natural instinct you have says, don't do it. In our generation, unlike my parents' generation, my dad's 92. He's had 30 years since he retired. How the hell are you going to fill 30 years when you're not going to the office? He's a great role model. He's done a magnificent job. That's what worked for him. I'm not suggesting what works for him works for someone else, but you need to figure out your own path. And taking ownership for that and getting started with it, I submit, is way harder than running your business if you have a successful business. And you can't pull a book off the shelf. There's a couple books written about it, but not a lot. When I talk to wealth advisors and financial advisors who counsel families, they say this is still one of the biggest issues they see. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Money often makes it harder because it blinds you to the issues have nothing to do with money. It's what's my purpose how to identify, very importantly, what's my social structure? If you spend 60, 70 hours a week in the office, who are you going to talk to for 60 hours a week? My mom said, hey, for better or worse, from not for lunch. I spent 45 years having a life because you were never here. I'm not giving up bridge for you. You go figure out your own thing. Again, from a very traditional marriage, it's really true. Now, there are serial entrepreneurs who they'll buy, build, and sell 5, 6, 7 businesses. So they don't have the traditional retirement. My comments are really people who are somewhere on that traditional path that at some point they're not going to have responsibility. They want to go into let's slow down a little bit phase. I have a couple clients like that. They want, I want to be in the office half time. I don't want don't call me for every HR complaint, but don't spend more than X without calling me, which is perfectly good. That actually segues really well to figure out the next stage, because the traditional, you walk out on Friday with a gold watch and never coming back, that's probably the hardest way of doing it. And for people who run their own business, that doesn't work too well.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I have a client and he's just said to me recently that working on this 10-year transition plan that he and I have put together and thinking about those next steps in his entrepreneurial journey, he's a founder, is so much harder than the steps to build the business. And I thought it was really interesting he said that, and it dovetailed really closely to what you said. And yeah, taking the time to think about the identity outside of work, the relationships outside of work, that role that you have outside of work, and creating these pull factors to pull you towards your next thing versus feeling like you've been pushed out. And how can we help people avoid, ultimately what we want to avoid is that feeling of regret. I know Daniel Pink has done a lot of research and writing on regret lately, and we'll probably be hearing about that more in the media. And regrets are things you can't get back, because time, you can buy things, but you can't buy more time. And so rather it's the things you do, it's the things you didn't do, right?
Yeah, and so I'm just going to echo back, because in my work, I say the goal is to have no regrets. It's a common phrase I use. And, another quote I like is, you can make more money, but you can't make more time. So I always tell people, figure out how to use your time. As long as the business isn't, at risk of failing, you're not, under stress, financial duress, it's about time. And as you age, time becomes more precious, and also your priorities tend to narrow, and the things you used to tolerate, you just don't tolerate anymore. That's a biological process.
Yeah.
And so focus, priorities, how do I want to spend time? When we get to the last stage of life where we don't have our vitality and we're still kind of with it, you spend a lot of time looking backwards because you're not really looking forwards. How do you be happy then? Sure, we made some mistakes, but for the most part, it was pretty good. I wish I didn't do this or that. But, to say it was a life well lived and I'm proud of it, that's the blessing you're hoping for.
Absolutely. Well, you did share a couple of quotes. Are those your favorites that you wanted to share with me today?
Yeah, those are the ones I tend to repeat the most often. So it's about asking the right questions, not getting the right answers. And you can make more money, but you can't make more time.
Absolutely. Bruce, if people want to get in touch to learn more, what's a good way to find you?
Thanks for asking. So my website is brucewerner.com, WERNER. We don't make cartoons like Warner Brothers. And my email is bruce@konaadvisors.com, KONAADVISORS.com.
Awesome. Is that your favorite coffee?
No, actually, the story was I needed a name for my company, and I wanted a story, alma mater, dogs, kids. I couldn't come up with anything, and I've been to Hawaii 10 or 15 times, kind of fond of it, and I just wanted a name I didn't have to spell on the phone and people would remember. And so I was stuck in a snowstorm one day, and the lawyer asked me, I said, well, I'll try this and I'll bury the name if it doesn't work, and I have some Hawaiian on my voicemail. One day I got a voicemail, It's the middle of February. It's miserable outside, but I heard your Hawaiian, and for just a minute, I was on the beach with palm trees swaying and blue water and white sand, and I just felt so good. That's why I knew I had the right name.
That's the right name. If you had one thing that you wanted to recommend to a business owner who's listening, who's been thinking about creating a independent board, what's the one thing they should do?
Be honest about what they're really trying to get done.
And then call you.
Please.
That's two things. I'm kidding. Yeah, really be honest with what they want to achieve. That's great advice. Bruce, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank
I really
you.
enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Listeners, thank you so much for your support. Catch Succession Stories on your favorite podcast player on YouTube and subscribe to the show. If you want to maximize the value of your business and plan for future transition, reach out to me for a complimentary assessment at meetlaurie.barkman.com. Join me next time for more insights from transition to transaction. Until then, here's to your success.